The last time these three cycles converged, the entire world changed. And this is your guide to understanding how we got here, what's going on, where we're going, and of course, most importantly, what you need to be doing right now to be prepared. Now it's clear, the world's cracking apart. Everyone knows it. Everyone can feel there's something wrong, but most just can't seem to put their finger on it. In the US and all around the world, tensions have never been higher. Everyone knows that below the surface, something is wrong. But these are just symptoms. These are the symptoms that you can see, you can feel. But what's the real reason? What's the cause? What's at the root of all this? Well, it's something darker, something scarier than most realize. Now, many are waiting for things to just go back to normal. That it's all going to be over soon and that things are going to be like they were. Now, this is called normalcy bias. It's one of the reasons why humans are horrible at planning for the future. The reality is that the world we're going into is not the same as the one that we're leaving behind. In life, there's all types of cycles. In nature, we have spring, summer, fall, winter. We have feast and famine. We have booms and busts. And today, we see them all over, right? We see debt cycles, we see business cycles, we see presidential cycles, credit cycles, technology cycles, and understanding these cycles is what unlocks the key to see into the future. All right, what we are seeing happen through every country in the world, across every society, seems random to most people, like a black swan event. But once you understand the cycles that I'm going to break down for you in this video, you're going to have a brand new framework, a new lens to view the events unfolding, and it's going to become crystal clear. So let's go. All right, now real quick before we dig in, if you're new to the channel, my name is Mark Moss, and I make these videos because I want to change the way you think about money. Now, I'm trying to take these very complex subjects and make them very easy to understand so you can understand them, you can share them, and more importantly, make them actionable so you can take the actions you need to save yourself, your friends, and your family. If you like these topics and like to help me just get them to more people, you can do me a favor, you can help. All you gotta do is click on that like button right now so the algorithm sends it out to more people. Small favor to ask. Now, these are big topics. I'm gonna do my best to break them down and bring it to you as fast as I can. Now, this should be a book. It should be like a 12-hour book, but I'm trying to break it down into 3 videos. This is actually video number 2. So if you haven't watched video 1, I'm gonna have my editor go ahead and link it up here, and we break down the PSC, the political, social, cultural cycles. You have to understand those because that's what drives the technological revolutions. And when you understand those two, then you understand the financial cycles, the financial revolution, which is the 3rd video that I'm going to make after this. Now, like I said, it's a big subject. I'm trying to do the best that I can to get you prepared so you understand where we're going, where we are, how we got here, where we're going. If you'd like to join me, I am having a free event. There's a link in the description of this video down below, and you can join this free event where I'm going to break this down, put it all together, and give you those actions at the end because I know this is a big subject, more than I can get across in this short video. But we're going to go ahead and let's just go ahead and jump right into video number 2. Go back and watch video number 1, and then stay tuned for video 3, but let's go ahead and jump in. All right, so as I said, this is the 2nd in a 3-part video series. In video number 1, we talked about the PSC, the political, the social, and the cultural cycles, and really the revolutions. We broke down 28-year, how they build into 28 years build into an 80 to 84 year, and 384 build into a 250 revolutionary cycle. I walked you through the last couple of them so you could see how they set up and where we're going right now. If you haven't watched that video, go back and watch it. Now, we're talking about cycles because as I broke down the other video, human progress is not linear. It's exponential. But within that exponential movement, there's cycles that are repeatable. So while the world's changing, it's also becoming the same. And when we can understand that, we can understand, like I said, why we're here, where we're going. But most importantly, when these cycles converge, it's like fireworks go off. So go back and watch video number 1 if you haven't seen that, because you need to understand that, because that is what triggers the technological revolutions, which is what we're going to talk about today. All right. Cycles are reactive. All right. So they react. Technology is developed to solve problems that we have. So you have to understand this to understand the problems that technology is solving for the technological revolutions. I'm not talking about the new iPhone. I'm talking about revolutions, which I'll break down. And then when you understand those 3, then you understand how it triggers and drives the financial cycles and revolutions, which we're going to get to in the 3rd video. All right. Now, The characteristics of a technological revolution. Again, I'm not talking about new technology. I'm not talking about your TikTok app or whatever it may be. I'm talking about technological revolutions. These are big. So the characteristics are, it needs to be disruptive. And I'm not talking about incremental. I'm not talking about making a small improvement, like, for example, well, I'll give you an example in a second, but it needs to completely completely destroy the old way, as opposed to just making it a little bit better and better and better. As a matter of fact, it also needs to build new economy. So it's not just, again, incremental, it's going to build an entire new category, and it needs to change life and humanity. All right, I'm talking about a technological revolution, not a new technology, a revolution that completely changes our way of life and humanity. For that point, I'm going to give you a couple examples. Now, I'm not talking about technologies like Uber and Airbnb. Now, they seem pretty revolutionary, and they are, but they were more incremental. All right, so it's an extension of the internet boom that we've gotten, which is really an extension of a different technological revolution, which is the information age, which I'm going to break down for you in a second. But these have helped a dying economy. So the economy, as we've broken down through the 250-year political cycle that we went through in video 1, you understand where we're at in this cycle, and they help the economies to keep going. They don't create entire new segments, and really they're confined to niche markets. So of course, Uber's confined to just the rideshare, Airbnb's confined just to like state hotels or travel, or what do you want to say. And so they need to destroy, creative destruction, disrupting markets, market disruptors, right? So they need to destroy the old way to create new ways. So let me give you the examples of what these are. So these came from the book, Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital. It's a great book, by the way. If you really want to understand this subject on a deeper level, then go back and read that book. But here is the technological revolutions that we've had. And so it goes back to the 1700s. Now, we talked about this in the first video because this also corresponds with the 250-year revolution cycle, which I unveiled in that video. So 250 years ago-ish, 1771 was the Industrial Revolution. Again, it's a revolution. It wasn't new technology. This changed humanity. Before this, the whole world lived on farms, and there was a little bit of business through like the cottage industry. But this brought people out of the farms into factories, into cities, into urban environments. It enabled machines, mechanical machines, to do the work that hundreds of men or men hours would take in order to get that done. It changed humanity. Then we went in 1829, the age of steam and railways. And again, it changed humanity. So since the beginning of time, we had manpower, we had horsepower, and that was it. Now we have machines. It was kind of an extension of the Industrial Revolution. We have machines that could run on steam. So steam ships, steam engines, things like that. And we also got railways, which was really big. So now we could transport big, heavy loads over long distance of time. And that changed humanity. All right. Then in 1875, we had the age of steel, electricity, and heavy engineering. Another big, big moment, 1875. So steel. So think about before steel, you could build buildings, 2 or 3 stories high out of bricks. Now we could build skyscrapers. Now we could build bridges. Now we could build ships. We had electricity. So all of humanity lived without electricity, with no light. And it's not just light that electricity gave us. It gave us the ability to do what we're doing right now. Without electricity, this wouldn't be possible. It changed humanity. Of course, then in the 1900s, we got oil and automobiles, mass production. That was a really big thing. Since the beginning of time, since the beginning of mankind, they've walked or ridden on horses. Now there's cars. It was an amazing thing. That was in the 1900s. Of course, the assembly line was built off of that, mass production. In the 71, we got the age of information and telecommunications, which, as I mentioned earlier, the internet is really an extension of that. So 1971 was the microprocessor, was the personal computer, which has opened up all this, which is why you're able to watch me today, was an extension of that. Now, if you're doing the math in your head, you'll realize that this is about every 50 years. Again, we have cycles. So about every 50 years, there's a new revolution, not a new technology. Within the 71 technological revolution, there's technologies in there, of course, like the internet. But about every 50 years, we have a new revolution. So 50 years of 71 brings us to this year, if you're doing the math, right? 2021. What is the technological revolution that corresponds with the 250-year revolution cycle that we discussed in number one? Well, let's go ahead and break that down. So what is it? What's the new revolution? Well, if you watched video number one, which you should have, hopefully by now, like I said, this really builds on top of that. You understand that when cycles converge, we get big explosive things, big things happen, all right? Much more important than just when one cycle completes on itself. So when you go back and understand the PSC cycle, which is the political, social, cultural cycles, I broke down that there's an 80-year regime change. So every 80 years, you get this populist uprising and you get a regime change. And I gave you historical accounts to show you why that is and how that works. And then I showed you how 3 84 regime change cycles, 3 times 84 equals a 252 revolutionary cycle. And that's where we're at today. So that is the big one. And I talked about how we're at peak globalism, peak globalization, and how the world is rejecting that right now. Lots of proof. Go back and watch the video if you haven't seen it. But what's important to understand is that this is the cycle, the 250-year cycle that we're in. But what's important to understand is that cycles and progress are reactionary. So like I said, technology is about solving problems. So it's reactionary. There's a problem, technology comes up with a solution. So you have to understand what the problems are to understand what the technologies are that are going to solve those problems. Now, I made the case in this that the 250-year revolutionary cycle is going to end opposite of how it got started. So for the last 250 years, there's a couple cycles. There's a regime change cycle, 80 years. There's also a centralization, decentralization cycle for 80 years. And there's a 250-year revolutionary cycle. They're all converging right now. And the problem is centralization. The problem is globalization. The problem is manipulation and all those things. And so the problem leads to the solution. So let's take a look at that. So at the same time as the 80-year centralization, decentralization pendulum is swinging, it's the same time as the fourth turning and massive changes about to happen over this next decade, the same time as we have the regime change cycle, the same time as we have the 250-year revolutionary cycle, we have a new technology at the same time. On the 50-year cycle, technology cycle, and the 250-year cycle of technology. So the PSC revolution, political, social, cultural revolution ends. It ends centralization and top-down control. All right, we're already starting to see this. Go back and watch the video if you haven't already. It's going to end social engineering, which is financial and social manipulation. That's the government printing trillions of dollars, given to whoever they want, getting people richer, making people poor, social media, manipulating everything, your bank, putting fake bank accounts, all of that centralization, top-down control, all of that social engineering manipulation. It's going to end all that. It's going to end wealthy elitism and move more to a meritocracy, in the top down, and start building from the bottom up. And it's going to bring us a whole new world. Now, I break that all down for you in the video, but this tech revolution solves all those things. So now we have, at the same time, we have a brand new technology that does what? It fixes those things. So instead of centralized top-down control, the new technology is decentralization. Instead of social engineering and financial social manipulation, we have a technology that's decentralized and it's trustless. We don't have to trust these central entities that are manipulating and social engineering us. It's borderless, so it works all over the world. It's permissionless, so this wealthy elitism, whoever has control over the system has the benefit of the system. It ends that because now it's permissionless. Everybody is free to join equally. Equal opportunity. It's censorship resistant. So again, no more of this top-down wealthy elitism that can be manipulated, seized, and stolen. And a whole new world. It's also personless. A technology that's all these things and it's personless, and that's big. And I'll have to break that down a little bit later. Now, the other thing that it does in order to break all of these things is that it's also a technology that gives us governance, or the difference of governance versus rules. Instead of governance, it gives us rule. And that, again, is a whole new thing. Now, what am I saying by that? So 250 years ago, back to the PSC revolution, was the founding of the United States, the Declaration of Independence, the revolution in France as well. There was a constitution that was put in place to protect the people by a rule of law. But what's happened over 250 years is that constitution has been changed. So now we're ruled by men instead of law. So what does that mean? So the rule of law versus governed by men. So a rule of law is a set of laws that can't be changed. And each one of us has to abide by those laws. And we plan our lives based off of working off those sets of laws. But what happens is you get to a set of governance where people can decide to make new laws. They can change the rules. The problem is, how can I plan my life over the long term when the rules keep changing? Now, on a big enough scale, this causes lots of problems. Let me give you a couple small antidotes. So the pandemic happened, and the government decided that they had the right to make you shut down your business. Okay? So you had spent your life savings to build out this new restaurant, and now you can't pay the bills, and now you're losing your life savings. So they say, well, you can't eat inside, so you can go eat outside. Okay, so then you set up a bunch of tables, and then you build out these tents, and you spend money that you don't have to now build this outdoor eating area. And then they say, oh, nope, you can't eat in outdoors either. See how they just keep changing the rules? You're governed by men. Rather, we need a set of rules, the rules that tell people what to do. The law is clear. It's simple to understand. It's known in advance, and it doesn't change. And this new technology, this decentralized technology, gives us a way to do that. Now, what are the implications of this? All right, it's hard to imagine. And the reason why it's hard to imagine is that humans are no good at imagining the future. We're not good at that. We can only, as humans, only imagine a better version of what we have today. We have cars, well, flying cars, right? Something like that. We have whatever, right? So we can imagine better versions of what we have today, but we can't envision entire new things. So we got the internet. In the mid-90s, we're having this conversation, and it's like, oh, well, what's the internet? Well, it's kind of like a way we can send electronic messages and electronic message boards. And we envision that maybe one day we might have these online meeting rooms, and maybe one day we might even be able to buy stuff online. So those are things that we could imagine. Those were better versions of what we knew. We didn't know, and we never would have guessed that one day our car would be hooked to something called a cloud, using something called artificial intelligence and social media to navigate us around traffic. We didn't know any of that because we didn't have any of those building blocks at that time. And so that's why we're horrible at this. But we do know that it's going to drive massive change. When you can change humanity, human nature has been the same throughout humanity. That's why we have the revolutions. If you watch the previous video, understand this. And that's why it ebbs and flows from bad times to good times back to bad times, because human nature, you get more freedom. Over time, it becomes captured again. Over time, it gets disrupted and more freedom again. But if we can build a new set of rules, a new system that can't be manipulated, how does that change? Well, to understand how this works, or how it unfolds and how it plays out, we have to understand, as I've already made the case, that cycles and seasons are reactionary, right? So it's a problem solution type scenario. And so technology cycles, technological revolutions, are no different. They're just like the PCS, the political, cultural, social revolutions, and they unfold in repeatable ways. So we can go back and look at the previous technological revolutions to see how they've unfolded, and then we can understand how this one is set to unfold. Now, there's something called the Diffusion of Innovations theory, and this kind of lays out the time frame and how this works. And so I'm sure most of you guys have seen this chart before, but with new technology, you kind of have this type of a system where you have the innovators. These are the developers. These are the ones that created it. These are a couple of their buddies that are helping them with it. And then very quickly, you get the early adopters. And these are the people that just love tinkering. They love new things. They want to play with it. There may not be a use case for it, but they're going to have it anyway. And then eventually you get the early majority. And those ones start coming in after there's a little bit of proof case, a little bit of use, eventually late majority, and then laggards. And you can see that the innovators are about 2.5% of the market. And the early adopters are about 13.5%. So that makes up about 15%. adoption, penetration in the market to get to this early adopter stage. By the time we get to 50%, we're into the early majority at 50% adoption. Of course, late majority takes us up to about 85%. All right, I'm going to give you a little bit more breakdown, but let me give you a couple real world illustrations of how this works. So let's go back and just look at the one in 1908 on automobiles. So automobiles, oil, automobiles, assembly lines, that was all new technology. It was a technological revolution. And so when those were invented, the early majority, the innovators got in, right, really quickly. And then came the speculators, then came the bankers, the money. And just like everything else, mass frenzy came into the market. It erupted, mass frenzy. Everybody wanted to be an automobile manufacturer. Lots of money came in. And guess what? Within a few short years, there was over 250 automobile manufacturers that popped up. But that was the problem. What was the problem? Well, there was a lot of excitement around the new technology. There was a lot of money. There was a lot of development, but there was no market for it. There wasn't enough people out there to buy all those cars because the market was too early. All right. And then there was also no infrastructure. What does that mean? Well, there was a bunch of cars, but there was no roads to drive them on. There was no gas stations to fill them up. There was no repair places to get your tire fixed. And so while there was a lot of cars, there was no market and there was no infrastructure. So what happens? Well, there was no market fit. So it went out of business, bankruptcy. All the auto manufacturers went out of business. There was about 3 that remained, Ford, Chrysler, GM. And of course, then it continued to grow, not because it was a bad idea. It's just how it rolls out. It's how it always rolls out. You get this same thing. Let me give you another example. In the 1990s, we had the internet. That was a big boom. I was fortunate enough to be investing through that period. In 1990, the internet went live. www went online. I think 1991 or 2, it was featured in the New York Times, www. In 1994, the first internet purchase went down, and coincidentally enough, the first purchase online was for a pizza from Pizza Hut. Just like the first purchase done with Bitcoin. 1995 is when the money came in. 1995 was the first IPO that was done, and it was Netscape, and it was massive, and all of a sudden it just brought a ton of money into the space. 1997, 7 years after the internet went live, Google registered their domain name. By 1999, 40% of users were using the weather app. That was the primary use case at the time in 1999. And by the year 2000, 15% of Americans had reported buying something online. Now, why do I break this down? Well, this is exactly what we saw in the automobile boom, right? So we had this technology, it went on for about 10 years, and it got some attention from the IPO, lots of money to be made. It brought in all the speculators, and everybody rushed into the market, and we had hundreds or thousands and thousands of new websites, web apps, whatever you want to call them now, all these websites, and they went live. And we had the famous ones in 1999, 2000 were, webvan.com and pets.com and things like that. And they weren't bad ideas. As a matter of fact, today, everyone orders food online. Everybody buys pet stuff online. It wasn't that they were bad ideas, like the cars weren't bad ideas. The problem was the same thing. There was no market. There was nobody to buy food online. There was no one to buy pet stuff online. Not just no market, there was no infrastructure. So what do I mean by that? Well, the internet was too slow. If you were around to use it back then, it was too slow to even be used like that. In addition, and so what that means is that there was no market fit. So those ideas weren't wrong, but being wrong is early, or being early is wrong. And so there was no market fit for that overall. And so what happened? Well, the market crashed and went into bankruptcy. You can see it illustrated in this chart. I've kind of broken it down into colors here. So you can see these innovators here in the early 90s. Then we went to these early adopters here in this middle period, 94, 95. Then we really started taking off into this early majority up into here. And then finally we got to the market frenzy right here before the whole market blew off, before they realized that, hey, there's no market. There's no infrastructure here. None of this works. Now, that didn't mean it was all wrong. That just meant that it was too early, because this is the way that technology rolls out. Now, we can see that, of course, in this chart right here, it wasn't the end. It crashed, but it just kept going. Because of course the internet is everywhere today and we use that technology all the time, but it's important to understand how this works. Now, if we're looking at this new technological revolution that I'm alluding to, it's Bitcoin, if you're wondering. It answers or checks all the boxes to the problems that we have in the 250-year revolution. As I said, decentralized rules, a decentralized rule system, open, borderless, permissionless, etc. And so it's an answer to that. It's a revolution that's going to change the world. And if we want to understand where we're at in this, we can look at something similar. This is the same theory, where we can use something called the S-curve adoption. Now, S-curves are used for all types of things. I used S-curves through all financial models, technology models. I even used it when I was looking at the coronavirus pandemic as it was breaking out in March of last year. And typically the way the S-curve works is that it says the amount of time that it takes to get 10% of penetration is the same amount of time that it would take to go from 10% to 90% penetration. All right. So in the case of Bitcoin, per these studies that have been done, it took about 10 years to reach 10% adoption right here. All right. As you can see right here. So in 2009, nobody owned any Bitcoin. By 2019, about 10% of US households had reported owning Bitcoin. So that's 10 years to get to 10%. That means that it would take another 10 years to get to 90%, which means we get almost this vertical stretch right here. Now we might be in this 15, 20, 25% area. So now we're taking off, but we still have this whole run to go, which means that 2029 is going to be that big year when we should see mass adoption. Now, why is this important? Well, if you go back and understand cycles and revolutions that we talked about in the first video, you understand that it's all happening this decade. I broke down all the reasons why, the fourth turning, all the change happens in that end. We broke down the revolution cycles. It's somewhere in between 2023 and 2026. But all this is changing, and at the same time, we have a technology that enables that change. But there's one big piece that we're dealing with right now. And you're all dealing with this. You're seeing what we call FUD. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt is coming out, and it's coming out hard and through mainstream. And that is the part that we have to get through, which is called crossing the chasm. The chasm is this gap right here that has to be made. After the innovators and the early adopters get in there, we need to get over this chasm before the early majority can come in. So the way that technology rolls out is that it starts out as a fad with no market value, no known market value or any purposes. It's just a fad. It's just a new technology, but with great properties. So it has great properties. It has great potential. Like Bitcoin has this potential, but lots of people say, well, it's too volatile. It's too slow, all these things, but it has great potential and it generates enthusiasm. So while the early adopters are playing with it, the rest of the world just watches. And they watch to see if anything's actually going to happen with it. All right. That's the chasm. All these people are watching. All right. If something comes out of it and the value proposition is discovered, then they can start coming in, which of course is what we're seeing today. We saw a few weeks ago, NYDIG come out and announce that they are going to enable banks to offer Bitcoin to be bought, sold, and transferred directly from inside your bank account, opening up over 300 million checking accounts. And that is what we talk about crossing this chasm. It's all happening right now. Now, how do we navigate this? So now knowing that we have this PST revolution, we have this technology revolution, and now this feeds into the financial cycles and revolutions we'll break down in that third video. But how do we navigate this correctly? Well, we have to know the other two cycles because each one triggers the next. They're all reactivary. And we have to understand there's massive implications. Now, I've said before that I guess we're lucky to be living through this. If you get this right, it can be massive for you. Well, it's going to be massive either way. It's either going to be massively good if you get this right, and it could be massively bad if you get this wrong. If you're, 20, 30, 40 years ago, you didn't have to worry about this. There wasn't this change. It wasn't in the middle of a 250-year revolutionary cycle on top of an 84 regime change cycle. But it is what it is. We are where we are. This is going to massively impact your life, and you can either get it right or get it wrong. But you have to understand all three. Now, like I said, I am doing a live event where I'm going to put all this together and give you my action plan. There's a link in the description if you want to join that. It's a free event. Just come hang out. And I'm going to try to break all that down at the end and explain it to you. but I'm just trying to set the stage. It's a deep subject. Really, like I said, it should be a book, but I'm trying to put together in 3 videos. But you have to understand these 3 revolutionary cycles. We haven't seen this for 250 years. This is something unique for not just our generation, but for multiple generations. And so go back and watch the first one, the political, social, and cultural cycles and revolutions, if you haven't seen that. These are technology cycles and revolutions. You can see that we have a brand new technological revolution starting to fix all the problems of the PSC cycle. And it's all starting right now. I've laid out the adoption pattern. And of course, now we want to get into the financial cycles and how we can play this for our finances. So go ahead and make sure you watch that next video. Of course, this should have hopefully triggered a bunch of questions for you. And if so, please ask your questions down below. I want to answer those questions. I want to engage in those conversations with you. So please ask those questions below. Send me a comment. And of course, give me a thumbs up on this video if you like it, because you know I'm putting a lot of work into this. And if not, give me a thumbs down. That's okay. Either way, just leave me a comment and let me know why. All right. That's what I got for you today. To your success. I'm out.